When this sports car exploded on a downtown Salt Lake Street yesterday afternoon, police thought the bomber had struck again. But by later in the day, Hofmann was their prime suspect in the earlier bombings. Armed with a search warrant, investigators this morning returned for a thorough search of Hofmann's demolished car. Among the items recovered, according to Police Chief Bud Willoughby, are some historical LDS church documents.
Yes, there are a large number of what we feel very expensive documents in the automobile and found in the trunk.
Detectives also searched Hofmann's home last night, carrying out several bags of evidence. And Chief Willoughby says there is an indication that Hofmann was familiar with the workings of explosives.
We received a call that gave us some inside information about his background and leads us to believe that he is well schooled in it.
The chief says he believes the bombings are now over, but also thinks there were at least 3 other intended victims.
One of the individuals, in fact, called us today and said, "I know that I am next. You've got to help me."
Willoughby says yesterday's explosion was just a half block from where that person was at the time, perhaps the McEwen mansion, which was evacuated and searched.
Even though Mark Hofmann has not been formally charged with the October bombing deaths, his legal fees mount. If charged, those bills will skyrocket. His attorneys are resigned to the likelihood he will be legally accused, an action rumored to be 2 or 3 weeks away. Attorney Brad Rich says if Hofmann is charged, his defense will be very, very expensive. Rich says some supporters are already inquiring about a defense fund.
When there are charges filed, we intend to let people, in fact, to request people who feel strongly about this case to do what they can to help Mark out.
Financially.
That's right.
Rich says Hofmann should remain free from imprisonment if he is charged by facing low bail or no bail.
A person has the right to be presumed innocent until he's proven guilty, and of course, if he's kept in the county jail, that's hardly a measure of innocence.
Rich says Hofmann is not a danger to society and is not likely to flee, thereby deserving of a recognizance release. Further, Rich said the county can avoid the expense of Hofmann's physical therapy and surgery if he is not jailed.
He's going to have additional surgery shortly after the first of the year on his knee. I think that the tab is going to be huge.
Although Rich anticipates murder charges will be filed, he believes fraud charges will not be immediately forthcoming. He says investigators are barking up the wrong tree and should look at suspects beyond Hofmann. Lynn Packer, Eyewitness News.
Hofmann did not enter pleas today to the 28 counts, including 2 for the October bombing deaths of Steve Christensen and Kathy Sheets. The other charges relate to fraud and building a bomb. Defense attorney Ron Yangich says it's the first time he's had details and specific charges.
We, for the first time today, have been given any discovery or any information from them. But most of what we've heard has come from people who have called us from the media and said, "Did you know that they're doing this?" And generally, we haven't known. Now we again have a framework. This is the first time. So it'll be interesting to see what their theories are and see if they match up with what the facts are.
But we don't know. The details of the theft by deception and other fraud-related materials have been sealed.
They're sealed to avoid unnecessary pretrial publicity, and because it's usual practice in cases of this dimension and this profile to do so.
The identities of 8 victims of the alleged fraud have not been revealed, but in 7 counts, the LDS Church is listed as the victim. Others listed are Provo documents collector Brent Ashworth, Salt Lake coin dealer Alvin Rust, LDS Church President Gordon B. Hinckley, and listed together Gary Sheets and Steve Christensen. One of Hofmann's attorneys says police have told him they believe most of the documents Hofmann sold the LDS Church are forgeries, but other documents collectors remain skeptical until they see the court evidence.
Mark Hofmann first came to the public's attention in 1980 when he sold this item, the Charles Anton manuscript, to the LDS Church. Now prosecutors say it's phony, that it's not authentic. And they also say that at least 14 other documents sold or traded by Hofmann are fakes. The list includes many of the documents for which Hofmann has gained prominence as a rare documents dealer. The Joseph III blessing, 4 handwritten Brigham Young notes, an 1829 Lucy Mack Smith letter, the 1825 Joseph Smith letter to Josiah Josiah Stoll, the E.B. Grandin contract for printing the Book of Mormon, the Martin Harris or White Salamander letter, an 1844 letter from Joseph Smith to General Dunham, the Nathan Harris Book of Common Prayer, an 1873 letter from David Whitmer to Walter Conrad, and an 1828 letter from David and Peter Whitmer to Bethel Todd. These alleged forged documents are mentioned in the probable cause statements made public today by Judge Paul Grant. The papers say documents examiner George Throckmorton has done extensive scientific analysis on all of the documents and has concluded that none are authentic. The county attorney wanted the statements sealed to avoid pretrial publicity, and yesterday Grant agreed. But today, after hearing arguments, Grant ordered the probable cause statements unsealed, saying they contain the barest and elementary information in support of the charges against Hofmann. Indeed, most of the information in the statements has already been reported by the media since the bombings last October. They portray Hofmann as a man caught up in a maze of high-stakes documents dealing and double dealing with dollar amounts in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. As his debts mounted, associates described him as agitated and distraught. The statements say Hofmann told one friend he could face criminal charges if he couldn't get his financial problems solved. Dwayne Cardall, Eyewitness News.
I was a little bit troubled by the probable cause statement and finally getting some of the police reports, and I think that there's a real serious dispute between the probable cause statement and the police reports which we read into evidence.
In court, Yengich questioned Police Detective Ken Farnsworth about the probable cause statement that says 2 eyewitnesses saw Hofmann sitting in his car doing something just before the vehicle exploded. Yengich questioned the detective about initial police reports, quoting the witnesses as saying Hofmann was outside the car, about to get in when the bomb exploded. Farnsworth said one of the witnesses later changed her story, and the other witness said he looked away just before the explosion. Police maintain that Hofmann was arming a third bomb when it exploded accidentally. Defense attorneys, though, say the bomb was set for Hofmann, that he's a victim, not a suspect. Yengich also questioned the reliability of 2 witnesses who identified Hofmann as the man bringing a box into the judge building the morning Steve Christensen was killed by a bomb. Yengich says Channel 5 News showed a picture of Hofmann to one of the witnesses before the police held a lineup, and he says that tainted the witness identification. The defense submitted polygraph tests to the judge but called no witnesses. Prosecutors called just one, Detective Farnsworth, who outlined the strongest elements of the state's case.
We've touched on most of the highlights, or some of the highlights, shall I say, not even most of the highlights. And basically, we're in a bond hearing. We're trying to put it on in an hour. And we've touched on a lot of our aspects, but we certainly haven't even come close to scratching the surface of our case.
Oh, yeah, and there are more. I think these are all...
Mark Hofmann's attorneys today gave him yet another stack of documents to review as they prepare to rebut murder, fraud, and forgery charges. Hofmann is assisting in his own defense by helping analyze testimony and evidence surrounding the bombing case.
Now, who made this?
I don't know that.
Hofmann attorney Brad Rich says his office will eventually get thousands of pages of testimony collected by investigators.
So that was the Friday after the bombing?
Yeah.
Rich said his office will put up more than mere token resistance during next month's preliminary hearing, that they're now looking carefully for flaws in the prosecution's case.
This is going to be, in any event, a major opportunity for both sides to take a serious look at the case and to test the witnesses, and for us in the defense to take a serious look at holes.
Rich once said Hofmann might make a public appeal for help in paying for what will be a very costly defense. Now he says arrangements have been made to pay legal expenses, but he would not say from where the money is coming. Hofmann continues to recover from injuries suffered October 16th when a bomb destroyed a sports car. Rich says Hofmann is on standby, awaiting knee reconstruction surgery as soon as a tissue donor can be found. Lynn Packer, Eyewitness News. 2 weeks ago, a federal grand jury subpoenaed a document called the Oath of a Freeman from New York dealers Schiller and Wapner. Some investigators believe Hofmann may have forged the alleged 17th century printed document, and then through a partnership with the New York dealers attempted to sell it for more than $1 million. An attorney for the dealers first declined to honor the grand jury subpoena, having concerns about the document's safety during transport and testing. Sources now tell Channel 5 that attorneys have reached an agreement whereby the oath will be tested for its validity without first being transported to Utah. Part of the agreement reportedly includes the fact the document will not be tested by the experts who allege most of Hofmann's major LDS documents are forgeries. The Library of Congress calls the oath one of the most exciting finds of the century, if genuine. Meanwhile, the county attorney's office is continuing to investigate other documents found by Hofmann. Its experts believe Hofmann may have been involved in print fraud and suspect the validity of documents like these Deseret currency notes. The Deseret notes purport to be money issued by Mormon Church President Brigham Young during Utah's early territorial history. A source in the county attorney's office says we're considering new things daily that may or may not be the basis for new charges. Hofmann's attorney, Brad Rich, said he's aware prosecutors are looking at the authenticity of printed documents. He called the oath of a Freeman the most tested document in history, and he said he's surprised the county and the grand jury question its validity. Lynn Packer, Eyewitness News. The latest charges against Mark Hofmann expand the scope of the fraud prosecutors allege he was committing. Now printed material such as these Deseret currency notes are added to the handwritten material like the Harris or so-called salamander letter investigators believe Hofmann forged. Although the new criminal complaint does not mention specific documents, Channel 5 has learned that early Mormon money is among those on the complaint. The other three documents reportedly are Jim Bridger banknotes, Spanish Fork co-op notes, and an Emma Smith hymnal. The preliminary hearing is scheduled to begin a week from Monday here at Fifth Circuit Court. The new charges give defense attorneys an opportunity to request a delay in that hearing, but they say they want to proceed anyway.
It's important to us, it's important to Mark, to see these witnesses on the witness stand, see how they look, and to do that as soon as possible. We're anticipating going ahead in a week.
The preliminary hearing will not only deal with document fraud charges against Hofmann, but also with the allegation he murdered financial consultant Stephen Christensen and Kathleen Sheets. Prosecutors say they will not reveal their entire case at preliminary hearing, but enough new information to show more convincingly Hofmann was involved in fraud and murder. Defense attorneys say they will challenge government witnesses, but likely save their own key witnesses should a trial be ordered. Lynn Packer, Eyewitness News. Prosecutors dressed casually worked overtime yesterday and today preparing their case against Mark Hofmann. They need to convince Judge Paul Grant the case should be bound over for a full trial in 3rd District Court.
Yeah, they're both down here.
Prosecutor Bob Stott guesses the preliminary hearing will take at least 2 weeks, involving perhaps 50 prosecution witnesses. The hearing reportedly will first deal with the bombing deaths of Stephen Christensen and Kathy Sheets, with a federal bomb expert tentatively set to testify tomorrow. President Gordon B. Hinckley of the LDS Church First Presidency is on the tentative witness list. He helped arrange the purchase of some major LDS historical documents from Hofmann. Hoffmann's lawyers say compared with prosecutors, they have done little investigating. Brad Rich says they plan to first get a glimpse of the government's case before cranking up their own probe. Rich says they expect the opposition to present major and what may appear to be damaging evidence during the preliminary hearing.
That's what preliminary hearings are for both sides, to find out what they've got and what they don't.
Legal observers say the prosecution should try to answer several major questions, if not at the preliminary hearing, then in front of a jury later. Where and how did suspect Hofmann acquire bomb materials? Why was Gary Sheets apparently a bomb target, considering both Sheets and Hofmann say they hardly knew each other? For whom was the third bomb, the one that injured Mark Hofmann, intended? Who are the accomplices, if any, in the bombings or suspected document forgeries? Both sides agree that crimes of the scale alleged would require more than one person. Lynn Packer, Eyewitness News.
Mark Hofmann arrived 15 minutes early on crutches. He's accused of planning booby-trapped bombs that killed Stephen Christensen and Kathleen Sheets last October. He's also charged with 30 counts of fraud and theft by deception. Bruce Passy is the crucial witness in the state's murder case, and he was the first person on the witness stand today. He testified that Mark Hofmann, wearing a green and gray letterman's jacket, carried a small box into the judge building about 6:45 in the morning on October 15th. Passy testified that the box was addressed to Steve Christensen. Janet McDermott, an insurance representative occupying the office across the hall from Christensen, testified that when she arrived at work just before 7 a.m., there was a small box with Steve Christensen's name on it leaning against his door. She said about an hour later, while she was on the phone, she heard and felt an explosion. She said she heard a high-pitched crying that sounded like a little child dying. Ms. McDermott said Steve Christensen was lying on the floor. His entire chest was bloody. Margene Robbins, a woman who knows Mark Hofmann, testified that she saw him downtown at 9:15 the morning of the bombings. She said he was wearing a green and gray Letterman's jacket. Hofmann seemed relaxed and businesslike today. His wife and father sat behind him in the courtroom. The hearing is expected to last 2 weeks. Judge Paul Grant must decide if there is enough evidence for Hofmann to be bound over to stand trial in district court. This is Jack Ford, Eyewitness News at Fifth Circuit Court. Gary Sheets today said the bomb must have been meant for him because no one would want to kill his wife. Hofmann is accused of planting booby-trapped bombs that killed Kathy Sheets and Steve Christensen last October. Steve Christensen was a business associate of Gary Sheets. A 13-year-old boy who lives next door to the Sheets house testified that he saw a gold Toyota van driving slowly past the victim's home at 11:45 the night before the bombing. Aaron Teplick identified a picture of Mark Hofmann's van as being identical to the vehicle he saw driving past the house. Late today, Bradley Robert Christensen took the witness stand to describe what he saw the day Mark Hofmann was injured by a third bomb. He said he was walking near the Deseret gym and saw Hofmann get in his car and fiddle with something. He said, quote, it appeared he was moving something on the seat, shuffling. He said Hofmann was in the car for 60 to 90 seconds before the bomb exploded. Defense attorney Ron Yangich challenged the statement, saying the witness earlier told police that Hofmann was in the car just 2 seconds before it blew up. Prosecutors think the third bomb was intended for someone else and went off accidentally as Hofmann was moving it. Defense attorneys say the bomb was intended for Hofmann and he's a victim, not a suspect. Hofmann is charged with 2 counts of murder and 30 counts of fraud and theft by deception. Prosecutors will begin presenting evidence in the fraud and theft charges late tomorrow. This is Jack Ford, Eyewitness News at Fifth Circuit Court. Prosecutors began tying together the testimony of a dozen witnesses who have appeared over the past 3 days. Detective Jim Bell today told of a large manila envelope seized from Mark Hofmann's home with the name Mike Hansen on the front. There was testimony yesterday that an individual using the name Mike Hansen purchased many of the components used in the bombs at a Radio Shack in Holiday. The customer used this vacant field on 39th South as his home address. Detective Bell said he talked to Mark Hofmann at the hospital after he was injured. He said, I asked if he planted the bombs that killed those people, and he said he didn't. When I told him I was sure he had because we found the green Letterman's jacket at his home, that upset him and set off his medical alarms. Detective Bell said he was then asked to leave. Explosives expert Jerry Taylor testified that the bombs that killed Steve Christensen and Kathy Sheets and the bomb that injured Mark Hofmann were all made by the same individual. He said the bomb that injured Mark Hofmann was sitting inside the car near the middle console when it exploded. When told that Hofmann said it fell from the car as he opened the door, Taylor said that didn't happen in this case. He said Hofmann was sitting in the car with his right hand on the device when it went off. Prosecutors are nearly finished with evidence relating to the 2 murders. They're expected to begin tomorrow with testimony relating to the 30 fraud and theft counts. This is Jack Ford, Eyewitness News at Fifth Circuit Court. Shannon Flynn, a business associate of Mark Hofmann, testified about several document transactions. Flynn said he arranged for an investor from Mesa, Arizona to help with the purchase of a Betsy Ross letter Hofmann found. He said the letter was later traded for 16 Jim Bridger promissory notes. Flynn said it was Hofmann who discovered the notes and arranged the trade. The Bridger notes were sold to collectors for $4,000 to $5,000 each. One of the fraud charges against Hofmann involves the sale of a Jim Bridger note to Deseret Book Company. Prosecutors say the Bridger notes are fake. Earlier, a federal explosives expert testified that a grain of smokeless gunpowder was found in Mark Hofmann's van. Jerry Taylor said the powder is identical to that used in the bombs. Under cross-examination, he said the pipe bombs that killed Steve Christensen and Kathy Sheets are a type never used by the mafia. He said professional hitmen use several sticks of dynamite. Again today, there was testimony that Mark Hofmann sometimes uses the name Mike Hansen. The owner of a local engraving shop testified that a Mike Hansen ordered engraving plates for an Emma Smith hymn book.
A fingerprint expert later testified that a latent print on the Mike Hansen receipt matches Mark Hofmann's left ring finger. Testimony yesterday revealed that components similar to those used in the bombs were purchased by a Mike Hansen. The preliminary hearing is to decide if there is enough evidence to schedule a trial on charges of murder, fraud, and theft by deception. The hearing is expected to continue all next week. This is Jack Ford, Eyewitness News at Fifth Circuit Court. Don Schmidt, the former director of the Church Archive Department, said he met with Mark Hofmann several times between 1980 and 1984. Schmidt said 47 documents were acquired from Hofmann, and in most cases they were never authenticated. The church sometimes traded documents, he said, but usually paid cash. Prosecutors say 5 of the documents purchased by the church are fakes. The manager of an engraving company in Denver, Colorado, testified that a Mike Hansen, back in May of 1984, ordered zinc printing plates for Deseret currency. There was earlier testimony that Mark Hofmann sometimes uses the name Mike Hansen. One of the fraud charges against Hofmann involves Deseret currency. An Arizona businessman testified late today that Mark Hofmann wanted him to invest $185,000 in the McClellan collection, but he said he refused. That businessman, Wilfred Carden, said Hofmann later told him that he bought the McClellan collection with his own money and donated it to the church. Carden said he did invest $110,000 as one-third interest in the Charles Dickens Haunted Man manuscript, but he said he has never recovered his money. Carden said Hofmann also tried to involve him in the Oath of a Free Man, telling him he had 2 copies. He said Hofmann told him one had already been sold to the Library of Congress for $1.5 million. Carden said he declined to invest in the second oath. The preliminary hearing to determine if Hofmann will stand trial on 2 counts of murder and 30 counts of fraud and theft by deception will continue next week. LDS Church officials are expected to testify on Tuesday and Friday. This is Jack Ford, Eyewitness News at Fifth Circuit Court. Hugh Pinnock, a member of the LDS Church's First Quorum of 70, testified this afternoon that he arranged for a $185,000 loan for Mark Hofmann. Elder Pinnock said it was his understanding that the money was for the purchase of a controversial Mormon document known as the McClellan Collection. The loan came from First Interstate Bank. Elder Pinnock said Hofmann told him he was going to Texas the day the loan came through, June 28th, to buy the collection. He said 10 days later, Hofmann told him the collection was in a safe deposit box in Salt Lake City. Elder Pinnock said Hofmann told him he planned to donate the collection to the church and would repay the loan with money he received from the sale of the Oath of a Free Man. But he said Hofmann later told him the deal with the Library of Congress for the oath had fallen apart. Elder Pinnock testified that in early September, the bank notified him that Hofmann was delinquent on the loan. Elder Pinnock said he had several meetings with Steve Christensen and Mark Hofmann. He said he finally arranged for a mission president to buy the McClellan collection from Hofmann for $185,000. The documents would then be donated to the church. He said Hofmann was stalling, though, telling him that coin dealer Al Rust, who had invested $150,000 in the same collection, had one of the keys to the safe deposit box and he was out of town. Elder Pinnock said a meeting was finally set up for October 15th. Hofmann was to bring the collection to Attorney David West's office that morning. Steve Christensen was to examine the documents to be sure they were authentic before any money would be paid to Hofmann. But Christensen was killed by a booby-trapped bomb the morning of the meeting. A second meeting was set up the next day, but Hofmann never showed up. Earlier today, coin dealer Al Rust confirmed that he had paid $150,000 to Hofmann for the McClellan collection. He testified Hofmann owed him more than $250,000 for various loans. He said on June 28th, Hofmann paid him $165,000. That's the same day Hofmann took out the bank loan. He said he later gave him a check for $132,000, but that check bounced. Elder Pinnock today said he repaid the loan to First Interstate Bank himself. He said he felt responsible. Quote, "I don't believe the bank would have made the loan had I not called," unquote. Hoffman was alert and attentive during Elder Pinnock's testimony. The preliminary hearing is expected to continue all week. This is Jack Ford, Eyewitness News at Fifth Circuit Court. Kenneth Rendell, a Massachusetts documents dealer and an expert in forgery detection, testified that most of the Hofmann documents showed evidence of chemical treatment and forged signatures. Rendell said under ultraviolet light you could clearly see a bright blue tint indicating some type of aging agent. He said in some cases he could see paperclip marks where the documents had been hung to dry after being chemically treated. He said the only document not having the blue tint was the controversial white salamander letter. He said the handwriting on the salamander letter also appeared genuine, but added that its association with the other obviously forged documents makes it suspect also. Rendell testified during the 7th day of a preliminary hearing to determine whether Mark Hofmann should stand trial on 2 counts of murder and 30 counts of fraud and theft by deception. An associate of Mark Hofmann testified this afternoon that he lied when he told people he discovered the salamander letter. Lynn Jacobs said Hofmann discovered the letter, but asked me to take full responsibility because he did not want the publicity. The salamander letter was sold to Steve Christensen for $40,000. It was then given to the LDS Church. Christensen was killed in a bomb explosion October 15th, the same day he was to authenticate Hofmann's most controversial discovery, the McClellan collection. Prosecutors, though, say there is no McClellan collection, or if there is one, Hofmann doesn't have it. Prosecution and defense attorneys will take tomorrow off. The preliminary hearing will resume on Thursday. This is Jack Ford, Eyewitness News, 5th Circuit Court. Prosecutors have called 32 witnesses so far, trying to show that Mark Hofmann was responsible for the bombing deaths of Steve Christensen and Kathy Sheets. Most of the testimony this week centered on the 30 other charges that involve forged documents. Hofmann has been in court each day on crutches. His right knee was injured in an explosion October 16th. He apparently slipped off his crutches yesterday and landed on the injured leg.
He's in a lot of pain. It's, bone on bone.
Couldn't you have gone ahead without him?
No. It's a critical stage of the proceeding, and we can't waive his presence for a critical stage of the proceeding.
While attorneys and spectators were waiting for the hearing to begin this morning, Hofmann's doctors were examining the new injury. It was their decision to operate today. He's expected to be in the hospital 4 to 5 days. Judge Paul Grant postponed the remainder of the hearing until May 5th. Prosecutors say they need about 3 more days to finish their case. This is Jack Ford, Eyewitness News at 5th Circuit Court. Hofmann is charged with the bombing deaths of Steve Christensen and Kathy Sheets October 15th. The first witness on the stand today was Galen Rust. He said his father, Al Rust, paid $150,000 for an interest in the controversial McClellan collection. He said he accompanied Hofmann to New York in April of 1985 to pick up the collection. They were to personally bring back the most valuable items from the collection and ship the rest. He testified that Hofmann left him in the hotel room and handled the transaction by himself. Later, Hofmann showed him 3 receipts indicating the entire collection had been insured and shipped to Salt Lake. Russ said he never saw the documents in New York and still has not seen the documents to this day. Prosecutors say there is no McClellan collection. Wade Lillywhite, a rare book buyer for Deseret Book Company, testified that Hofmann, distraught and upset, tried to borrow $100,000 from Deseret Book last September. Hofmann offered to put up a collection of rare books for collateral and repay $150,000 6 months later. Lillywhite said Hofmann claimed he had sold The Oath of a Free Man to the Library of Congress but wouldn't be paid for 6 months. Hoffman called the next day to say he no longer needed the money, but then called 2 weeks later trying to borrow $150,000 and again using old documents as collateral. One of those items was Egyptian papyrus from which Hofmann said Joseph Smith translated the Pearl of Great Price. A business associate of one of the murdered victims testified late today about overhearing an argument. Robert Pitts said he was in Steve Christensen's office the morning of October 10th when Mark Hofmann came in. He said Hofmann and Christensen went into another room and he heard Christensen yelling, "You can't hide that." He said Hofmann came out of the room with a sober face and left the office. Christensen was killed in a booby-trapped bomb explosion 5 days later. Prosecutors say Christensen was killed because he was about to expose Mark Hofmann. This is Jack Ford, Eyewitness News at 5th Circuit Court. Thomas Wilding, an investment counselor, was on the witness stand most of the day explaining how he organized a group of investors to participate with Mark Hofmann in buying rare documents. Wilding said, quote, "We trusted Mark because of his reputation with the LDS Church." He said that 3 of the 4 document deals, though, went sour. He said the investors put up $160,000 for the purchase of a Charles Dickens manuscript. Then 4 months later, the investors advanced $173,000 to buy a second copy of The Oath of a Free Man. If it's real, the oath would be the earliest known document printed in America. Wilding said when investors became suspicious, Hofmann admitted he had spent part of the money for his own use, but said the investment was still sound. Their money was safe. Hofmann even signed promissory notes totaling $455,000. There was testimony yesterday from a local printer that Hofmann ordered 2 sets of printing plates for the oath of a free man. Wilding said Hofmann finally produced the second oath as collateral. He said when Hofmann failed to repay the investors, the oath was taken to Schiller and Wapner, a New York documents company that was trying to sell Hofmann's first copy of the oath for $1.5 million. Wilding said the New York dealers were, quote, totally overwhelmed, dumbfounded, and astounded when they saw the second copy. Wilding testified that Hofmann was to repay the investors the same day that Stephen Christensen was killed in a bomb blast. Wilding said the investors have still not been paid. This is Jack Ford, Eyewitness News, 5th Circuit Court. William Flynn is a documents expert with a long list of credentials. He works at the Arizona State Crime Lab. Flynn says he examined the documents involved in this case 4 different times. He said 461 documents were tested using infrared, ultraviolet, and microscopic examinations. He said the 18 Hofmann documents involved paper that was consistent with paper used in the 1800s. Flynn said the ink was also of a type used in the 19th century, but he said sodium hydroxide was used to artificially age the ink. He said when that aging ingredient was added, it caused a surface cracking of the ink after it was applied to the paper. On some documents, only the altered portion had ink that cracked. Flynn said the controversial white salamander letter is a forgery. He said there are surface cracks in the ink, and the handwriting is inconsistent with that period of time. An earlier witness, a documents expert, said the salamander letter appeared genuine. Flynn said the Joseph Smith letter to General Dunham is definitely a forgery. The letter was purported to have been written just hours before Joseph Smith was killed, but Flynn said 2 other letters known to have been written at the same time were on a different paper and used different ink. All of the documents in question, according to Flynn, were forged. Prosecutors have just 2 witnesses left to call. The hearing will resume next Monday. This is Jack Ford, Eyewitness News at 5th Circuit Court. Bob Stott told Judge Paul Grant that there was an extreme amount of pressure on Hofmann just weeks before the bombings. He said Hofmann had lots of fear of exposure during those weeks, and he said Steve Christensen was the center of all the pressure. Stott said Hofmann had to get rid of Steve Christensen. He said killing Christensen would give Hofmann some time, and he said that's all a con man ever wants is more time. Stott recounted testimony of experts who said the bombs that killed Christensen and Kathy Sheets and the bomb that injured Mark Hofmann were all made and delivered by the same individual. He said there was testimony that the bomb components were purchased by a Mike Hansen, and, quote, we've shown that Mike Hansen and Mark Hofmann are the same individual. Stott told the court that the fraud counts involved $944,000 in document deals. He recounted testimony of expert witnesses who said the Hofmann documents were forged. At one point, the prosecutor said Joseph Smith's signatures on some of the Hofmann documents were forged by Hofmann or, quote, one of the associates he collaborated with, unquote. Stott said it's clear that Mark Hofmann has the knowledge, the tools, and the means to create those documents. He said most of the controversial documents were unknown until Mark Hofmann suddenly appeared with them. Defense attorney Ron Yengich said his client had no reason to kill Stephen Christensen. He said Hofmann didn't owe money to Christensen or to Gary Sheets. Yengich said Steve Christensen was helping Hofmann, was offering his hand in friendship. He said the death of Steve Christensen does not help Mark Hofmann. Hofmann is charged with the bombing deaths of Christensen and Kathy Sheets, Gary's wife, last October. Hofmann also faces 28 other counts of fraud, theft by deception, and bomb making. Yengich said the prosecutors have still not tied the 3 bombs together in terms of purpose, scheme, or motive. He said the eyewitness identification should not be used because KSL TV showed pictures of Mark Hofmann to the witness before any police lineup. Yengich said, quote, the identification by Mr. Bruce Passy is so scarce in credibility, the case should not be bound over on his testimony, unquote. The defense attorney said, quote, they don't tell us anything about the Sheets death. There is no evidence the death of Sheets advanced the scheme to defraud, unquote. Yengich spent little time on the fraud and theft counts except to say that the 6 counts relating to the controversial McClellan collection should be consolidated into 1 count. He also argued that the statute of limitations had run out on 3 of the theft by deception charges. A ruling on whether Hofmann will stand trial or have some or all of the charges dismissed is expected tomorrow from Judge Paul Grant. This is Jack Ford, Eyewitness News at Fifth Circuit Court.
I think it's obvious to anyone who observed the preliminary hearing that a lot of preparation and a lot of work went into it, and I think we've been rewarded.
What was the strongest part of the state's case in the homicide counts?
I think just the thoroughness of the case, everything dovetailing back into everything else and everything accumulating and adding up.
Defense attorney Ron Yengich admits the state's case was thorough and well presented, but he said there are still holes, and motive for murder is the biggest. I asked him about the possibility of a plea bargain.
That's a loaded question, Jack. You know, obviously you want to talk about anything with the prosecution, but and we'll listen, but as I see it, we're going to go to trial.
Was there some surprises in the preliminary hearing? Was their case stronger than you thought it was?
Not surprises as such. I think that Jim Bell and Ken Farnsworth did a real good job of investigation, and I think that they packaged their case pretty well. I think that there will be surprises at trial.
This was the deadline for defense motions. They arrived at the court clerk's office just before closing. Included in the 22 motions are the usual constitutional challenges to the death penalty and requests to suppress evidence and statements to police. Hofmann is charged with the 1985 bombing deaths of Stephen Christensen and Kathy Sheets. He's also charged with 28 counts of theft by deception, fraud, and bomb making. A motion to sever asks for separate murder trials and further asks that 5 counts of theft and fraud be tried separately. They're all combined into 1 trial now. Defense attorneys asked that the trials be moved out of Salt Lake City because of vociferous public sentiment against the defendant, fueled by the news media. A notice of alibi was also filed. Defense attorneys say they will show at trial that Mr. Hofmann was at another location when the victims were killed by booby-trapped bombs. Prosecutors allege the victims died when they picked up boxes left by Mark Hofmann.
Oral arguments on the motions filed today will be heard by Judge Kenneth Rigtrip on January 29th. Some of the motions, if granted, could change the makeup of the prosecutor's case and limit the evidence that can be introduced. The prosecutors are concerned that a ruling won't come until just weeks before the March 2nd trial, and they won't know until then which witnesses to schedule and the exact direction the case is going to take. This is Jack Ford, Eyewitness News at 3rd District Court.